the world 3 times. It tells me we're live.
Good morning, all.
Awesome. Tells me I'm live. Okay, so we've got some people in the chat already. Jamal, I remember Jamal and Bruce. Want to do a special shout out to Bruce too, guys, because he gave us a bit of information that we can share later on.
Jamal, I remember Jamal and Bruce. Sorry. Look at that rookie mistake. Hooray! That's it.
It's okay. Hey, so we've got a couple of people watching us, so that's always good. So we decided that we were going to talk about Peter Green. And I suppose his role and the impact that he had for music from the 60s to the 70s. So do you want to give us an introduction, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Good to see everybody. Hi, Simon.
Hi.
Andrew, good to see you again. Saw you about an hour ago. But yeah, I think I was just driving my car before, and we Andrew and I have had quite a few laughs because we work together, and people come in and they hear music playing and that, and we mentioned the word Fleetwood Mac, and their first thoughts are rumours and some great rock music in the 70s.
Yeah.
But they forget about the roots of Fleetwood Mac, which was a blue-collared English blues band.
I don't know, Carl. I don't think that they forget about it. I think it's just
it's a generational thing, isn't it?
It's just a piece of history that's not even focused on, mate.
Well, I think even a layman would probably know the song "Black Magic Woman" or "Albatross." You would have heard that at least once, but no one knows who wrote it. When they think of Fleetwood Mac, they think of the Stevie Nicks, that sort of thing. But I think Peter Green, myself personally, I think most musicians would admire and respect him, but I think for a lot of people he's overlooked simply because 3 years he was in and out and gone.
Yeah, gone. Yeah.
So I'm glad that Andrew's mentioning us discussing Peter Green because he is overlooked, misunderstood, and he needs to be exposed for the great musician he is. And carrying on that great vein of English blues guitarists that sent a benchmark for rock even to this day. The classic Gibson Marshall combo, and what set Peter apart, which we'll talk about a bit later, was his extremely unique tone. A tone that was immediately identifiable only by him. I mean, I've tried to copy it. It's hard.
Yeah, his particular story about it. I mean, for me, the interesting thing about it is he's in the grand tradition of I know he was of Jewish rock musicians, like with Bob Dylan, of course, and people like Gene Simmons from Kiss, Lenny Kravitz. There's this big kind of interesting kind of Jewish tradition in rock music that I think is a kind of underplayed a lot of people. So I think he's in that. Interestingly, that was the first thing that struck me about him. Really.
Al Cooper,
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
a bunch
of interesting people doing that, and I don't know. There must be a strand there. There's a different podcast, but interesting nevertheless.
Paul Kossoff from
Paul Kossoff from Free. Yeah,
from
absolutely.
Whole bunch of them. Lou Reed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
whole bunch. Yeah. But Peter Green, very humble roots. He talked about his Jewish upbringing a little bit in his book. Subject, unfortunately, to a bit of anti-Semitism, but like a lot of kids, found solace in music, and in this case, particularly blues. So, interesting guy. He had some big boots to fill early on.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Filling in for Eric Clapton. Yes, when he left the business. Yeah. Ooh.
Oh, yeah. Would you like the job? Yeah, yeah. Can you replace Eric? Let me practice a bit more.
Didn't
Can you give me a couple of years?
Yeah. Well, that's what John Mayall said, didn't he? When Mike Vernon, the producer, he said, "Oh, he took him to the studio, and he went and he thought, that's not Eric's amp. What's that doing there?" And he said, "Oh, Eric's left, but we've got a new guy. What, is he better than Eric? Well, he isn't now, but he will be in 2 years." Which sounds like a bit of a nice bit of John Mayall. Although that John Mayall's Blues Breakers, I mean, imagine, you go from Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, Peter Green, you just, reeling them in, aren't you? One after the other.
Mick Taylor.
Oh, Mick Taylor after that, yes, absolutely. Amazing kind of what's in the water in 60s Britain that produces these amazing people.
Because Eric was the first guitar player. Then he took a bit of a break. Did Peter come in just fill the shoes temporarily? Then Eric came back.
Yeah, for 3 months. Yeah.
Sorry, Andrew.
He's obviously been playing around, and John Mayall must have seen him playing and stuff. But while he was doing that, I was also interested to see that Peter Green was not only interested in blues. He seemed to be interested in jazz and stuff like that. Django Reinhardt was one of his favourite guitar players and things. You can see that he never felt as though he was going to be confined into the blues. He was always going to do, broaden it out from where he was. Well, that's my feeling about it anyway, is that he, the blues was his, his main point, touching point, where he started from. But he could see that, pushing it out into different directions.
Oh, there's a great song when you mentioned the word jazz, this instrumental called Greenie.
That's right, yeah.
It's phenomenal. Key of C, and it's 3 a.m. music.
Yeah, but much more in that kind of jazz kind of thing than a straightforward blues thing. I mean, they're linked to a lot, but it's interesting that I think that he never saw himself just as a blues musician. All that was where he started. And what
I think we have to take our hat off though to John Mayall, and only a couple of days ago he celebrated his 84th or 85th birthday.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what amazes me about this, and we touched on this I think earlier, Simon, when we were talking about when you were first on about the British blues phenomena that happened in the late 60s. What amazes me is John Mayall's ability to bring bands together and obviously pick guitarists and individuals and give them a foundation. But he didn't do that in isolation. We have to also remember, and you mentioned him previously, Vernon.
Yeah, Mike Vernon, yeah.
Mike Vernon and the role that he had in conjunction with Mayall. So would you consider that a partnership? Was that like an unconscious partnership? Because it's certainly, I think
we
look at it 50
that's
years
the thread,
later.
isn't it?
Yeah,
that's the thread that runs through all of those albums. Is Mike Vernon and John Mayall. So yes, I do consider it a sort of partnership, and with Mike Vernon as the producer, I think it's a very interesting point that that they did make all those albums, and they must have gone out a lot and kind of looked at other musicians and stuff, people who are coming through. It's seemingly all the guys that John Mayall gets in all went and fought, well, except for Mick Taylor, but Beck, Eric Clapton and Peter all went and formed their own bands. So John Mayall must have seen these things as being kind of, I'm going to have to get somebody else in because, he's a powerful character and he's going to want to go and do his own band. And that's the way it's going to be, so I need to go and find the next one.
It's almost like
succession planning.
They call Muddy Waters the father of blues, and Willie Dixon, who was the chess talent scout, is almost like John Mayall was the British father of blues, and Mike Vernon was the white version of Willie Dixon, you know, an arranger, producer, talent scout.
Yeah, yeah.
Good point. Good point. You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, because Mike Vernon wouldn't have been the sort of guy. He would have had a certain sound in his head. He would have let Eric or Peter know, hey, you can do better. Or how about you try this? Or leave him on at 10, John. Stop being an old man. Leave his amp on at 10. That's what he wants.
Yeah, turn it up.
That's what he's hearing on the records.
Well, that's true though. Didn't John Mayall tell him if this is what Eric wants? Eric wants them on 10, wants his volume on 10, so leave it on 10. Was it Mayall that backed him up?
Oh, was it Mike that? I can't remember if it was Mike or John that was complaining, but one of the two said, no, that's how Eric wants to leave it on 10.
I think it was Vernon and his engineers that were complaining.
Oh, I see.
Probably, because I mean, in the 60s,
I don't think it was
a lot of that, wasn't there?
Yeah, I don't think it was John Mayall that was complaining.
No. I'm more than likely the producer, because I mean, in those days, the producers were like very, if you turn it up too loud, it gets distorted. The guitar gets distorted and stuff like that. That's what I want. It's a kind of perennial argument although interesting, I'm just looking up Lyman because I don't know much about him, but he's obviously young. He's younger than John Mayall. He's born in 44, so he must have only been 20. He's gone to 22, 23 when he was doing those Blues Breaker albums. Amazing, really. Kind of at that age, and obviously, younger than John Mayall, 10 years younger than John Mayall. I wonder where that comes from. Yeah, that's interesting. There's one of the new breed coming through.
And he, if you're a record collector, he started at label Blue Horizon Records.
That's right. Yeah.
You would have seen
which
a lot
is where
of that
Fleetwood Mac made their records, didn't they?
And that's a very sought after record label because he would acquire a lot of the American acts and have different covers, and he would get all the Magic Sam and a whole bunch of stuff. He was very much a almost like a professor almost of the blues. He was a young guy and very much what's the word? He was very much ahead of his time, I would say. So he's a big part of the picture that people don't think enough of.
Can I just do a shout out, guys, before we go on to continue the discussion? So Todd, also known as Soda Pop, g'day. Gussie Wells. No, Carl doesn't have a channel because he's undercover. So be careful what you say. Jimmy T.
Yeah, the one thing we know about Carl is his name's not Carl.
Jimmy T. And Bruce. Who, thanks for joining us, guys. Pooh Ninja's gone to
morning,
bed.
Guys.
Always good too. There's a question I'd like to ask you, Simon and Carl, and I'm glad you mentioned it earlier, Simon, because I was sort of thinking how to broach it. You mentioned that Peter Green was of Jewish roots and clearly working class. So do you think his Jewishness was a catalyst for him understanding what the blues was in the first place at a young age?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's that kind of basic oppressed nation thing, isn't it? Oppressed group that I think there's definitely a connection between the blues guys and Peter Green would have fed into that absolutely completely. And I think that having that kind of minority thing completely is a sort of thing. Yeah, it's interesting you say about his working class. Unlike the other, never went to art school. Not an art school person.
You pinched one of my points.
Sorry. Sorry.
Again, and I think what you've done there is mention something very, very interesting, and I'm going to. This is my theory. All the other guys who had issues with drugs and and other issues in their lives, had a network to fall back on. And that was probably a lot of the relationships that they formed while they were back at art school. I think when Peter, and we don't want to talk about this at this stage of the show, but one of the reasons why Peter fell into the position that he did in the early 1970s was because he didn't have a support network.
No, I think yes. I think well, I mean, Eric Clapton is that's a very strange situation, isn't it? I mean, it brought up by his grandmother, thinking it was his mother.
Yeah,
and and his mother, he thought his mother was his sister and stuff, and that's a very strange. That would send many a person off the rails, frankly. You discover that in later life, you wouldn't necessarily have. But I think. So I don't think it's about support networks, because I guess that his parents, solid working class people living in Jewish community in Bethnal Green kind of thing, they probably just didn't. It probably was just not a world that they inhabited. They probably just didn't get it as a world, in any kind of way. If they're sort of solidly working class, that kind of late 60s rock world that Peter Green would have moved into. Probably quite an alien world to them, and that whole kind of emerging rock culture that was happening in the late 60s. I think that a lot of those, the previous generation, I mean, it would have felt or did feel very uncomfortable about it and very alienated by it as a phenomenon, as a cultural phenomenon.
What age was Peter when he became a professional musician? Do you guys know?
Was he about not very old, was he? So he'd be 20.
So
20.
So John Mayall was his first band.
No, not his first band. He had lots of bands before that. He had he first played bass guitar in a band called Bobby Dennis and the Dominoes, and he did some. When he obviously liked Hank Marvin, he was also in a band with a guy called Peter Bardens. I don't know if that name means anything to you. Peter Bardens had a group called Camel later on, so a prog rock group called Camel, but not Peter Bardens' Camel, not Peter Frampton's Camel.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with Frampton's Camel. They're all called Peter. That's very sad. But they had an album, a sort of prog rock album called The Snow Goose, which has. I think it has flute on it. There we are, a flute reference. But so he played with him for a bit, and kind of before he joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers.
So when he joined John Mayall, as we know, he paid all his musicians a weekly salary, and they would gig sometimes 3 nights. I mean, they'd have three gigs on one day. So and they got paid really well.
Yeah. But he obviously had big talent. I mean, his brother gave him his guitar, he was just, he's able to pick up things, licks, and and songs, perfect copies of the stuff that he'd learned, very quickly and stuff, which is, it was really interesting. So he obviously had a real ear for what was going on, and how he could pick it up, and then the genius bit is not just doing the facsimiles, is it? The genius bit is where you take it, what you do next with it. And I think, if you're oh my God, if you're only 21 in 1967, it's a classic case of do your best work before you're 25. You can make a lot of arguments for rock stars doing that, before in their early 20s, what they did.
But Peter Green seemed to come across as a bit of a maverick, a bit of an outsider, because Andrew mentioned Eric Clapton, and Eric was close with not only the Beatles and the Stones, but Jeff Beck.
Yeah. It's that art school thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and then the Stones, Mick and Keith were close, and they were close to the Beatles, and then they were close a little bit with Eric. When you read up about Peter and that, he didn't have many fallback people, really. He was almost like introverted. A little bit extroverted on stage, but introverted most of the time.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that I know it's a bit of a tangent, but his drug of choice wasn't heroin, it was LSD. It was mind expanding, not that kind of shutting down the emotional kind of core with heroin and stuff, like Eric Clapton. You know, so I think there's a big difference in there, and you can make a case, can't you, for, you know, different kind of personality, different kind of person, different kind of drug. That's a bit, but you see what I mean. You know that you know that Eric, you know, wanted to dull the hurt and dull the pain, whereas Peter wanted to expand his mind.
Yeah. Hey, you know, going back to earlier, you mentioned, you know, we agreed and nodded our heads and thought, yeah, Peter Green was a genius. I'm going to throw this at you guys. So Eric Clapton's playing with John Mayall, and he develops a reputation pretty early as an awesome guitar player. People are coming to see Eric Clapton. Peter Green goes along as a fan. He's a fan. He hears about Eric Clapton, goes along as a fan. He's standing there watching Eric Clapton, and he's hearing Eric Clapton, and he's studying Eric Clapton. Clearly he's doing this. So he hears this tone, hears this sound that Eric's doing. So he purposely, this is my opinion, he purposely goes and develops a tone in completely different direction from Eric.
I think that's probably true. You know, you bring what you bring to it as well, don't you? That, I mean, I don't know if this is opposite to anything really, but I play in a covers band. You know, one of the key things about playing a covers band is that, as opposed to a tribute band, which is a different thing, but a covers band is, you know, we can take the basic structure of a song and just play it, and what comes out of the other end of us playing it, not whoever, Tom Petty or whoever, is that it sounds like us, not sounds like them. You know, it's recognisably their song, of course, but, you know, and I think that you can take two people, you know, different backgrounds, different things, you know, subject them to the same sources, and there will be a difference, a discernible difference between the two people, because they're different people and they bring different things to the table, you know, with what they've got in their personalities, in their styles, musical skills, you know, what they've picked up on, what they do. So
yeah,
I
think it was certainly something that Peter cooked. It was something that he purposely went and had experimented with. But he wanted to be different. He knew he was different, obviously, but he just wanted to make sure that everything that he was going to do was going to be completely different to the sound of Eric Clapton. If you have a look at his Les Paul, his Les Paul.
What with the reversed, or not reversed, the reversed pickup.
Yeah. So
the reverse polarity, yeah.
His Les Paul. See how my pickups are extending above the covers. If you have a look in some of the videos of Peter Green playing, he's got these flush.
Yeah.
With the plastic, what do you call these bloody things?
To pick up surrounds or whatever. Yeah.
Surrounds. Yeah. He's got them flush.
Yes, and high to pick up. I think the thing that we, you know, the most obvious thing, I will state as obvious, is that you know, the late 60s were a massive period of experimentation musically. You know, I mean, Eric Clapton goes from the Blues Breakers to Cream to Blind Faith, you know, in sort of 4 years, you know, completely different kind of things, completely different ways of doing bands, you know, and I think that's that period of experimentation, you know, that increasing emphasis on the LP. You know, 66 is the great year of the single. You know, 71 is the great year of the LP album. You know, you kind of, and you're saying, you know, all that experimentation, and it's going on in America too, you know, of expanding your playing, what you're playing, what areas you're going to move into, what styles you're going to develop, you know, what things you want to do, you know, to quote Tom Petty, the future was wide open. But you know, but you know, so effects, you know, they start to get a few effects. Jimmy Henry, not much, but you know, all that. If you think about the Beatles, you know, doing Sergeant Pepper's, you know, all that experimentation is filtering down. You know, people are seeing that, going, "Wow, look at what they're doing." You know, how are you getting that effect? How are you doing that? You know, what are you doing? You know, and I think that filters into all those guys. You know, and that kind of cross fertilization with all those musicians. I don't think it's. I think the thing we forget is, you know, we look at it from 2018 eyes, where music is this vast kind of disparate, you know, madness which you can't keep up with. No way. You know, in those days, I think it was quite small and quite contained. Everybody knew everybody else. And when you went out, you went and played. You know, we know this. You know, the other guys would come and see you play. You know, they wouldn't be. So Peter Green, you know, is seen by John Mayall playing with Peter Barden's Lunars, you know, and then, you know, Eric Clapton takes a 3-month break, so John Mayall gets Peter Green to come and play for 3 months while he's while he's doing something else. And I think that we forget how small that world is.
And he was nervous too, apparently, according to the information I've read. You know, he jumped at the opportunity.
Well, you would be, wouldn't you?
Yeah, he could see what the opportunity was going to give him, but he was nervous as heck. But yeah, the experimentation that you're talking about is interesting, because I can't remember the channel, and I've never read it, but a guy apparently who hung out with Peter Green said that one of the reasons why Peter changed that pickup is because he was playing the stumble, and he wanted to get a clean sound, and Peter thought that having the two pickups, that the magnets were compressing the sound, so he took the neck pickup out, so that he could reduce the magnetic field and get a clearer sound. And then recorded the song, was pretty happy with the results, and then put the pickup back in around the wrong way. Have you guys heard that theory?
No. I just remember.
I've not heard it.
So I just thought I heard him just put it. I only heard the last part where he just put it back in around the wrong way by accident. I thought he just might have been cleaning the guitar.
Do you think he did that by accident or on purpose?
No, I think he put it in. He put it back the wrong way round. But I've read some stuff here. I made some notes here about it. He says, you know, that he says, first of all, he says never had a magic. You know, he said might have looked. It was a bit of an odd guitar. I don't think it was. You know, he didn't feel as though it was a special guitar. And he said the pickups were strong, but I took one of them off to start with, because he saw Eric Clapton playing, and he heard it, and he played on the treble pickup all night. So he thought, well, maybe I'll take the other one out and just have a treble pickup. And you know, when he put it back in round the wrong ways. So the poles are obviously reversed, and that you know, it's not. I think it's more. It's not quite the out of phasing that we kind of think. It's he changed the pickup so that obviously the top E pole, the one at the bottom there, you know, was now doing the bottom E string, you know, the lower E string, and it got a different sound, you know, and it was totally stopped. The pickups wired in. They would see the pickups were wired. They were still wired in phase. He didn't change the wiring of them. He just literally just turned the pickup 180 degrees. So that in effect,
what's clear though is that it wasn't factory. It wasn't factory.
It wasn't a factory
like that.
No, he definitely did it. He definitely turned it round. You know, but he literally he didn't rewire it. They weren't rewired in any way. He just literally turned one down because he just put it round the wrong way and just put it in. And then obviously you get that kind of magnetically out of phase pickup, but not a sort of, I don't know, sort of not magnetically out of electrically out of phase kind of thing.
Yeah, which is what this is. This is electronically out of phase. It's not it's not magnetically out of phase.
Yeah, the same as my Chapman. My Chapman has the out of phase thing as well. I'm interested to see exactly what that is, but but yeah, it's literally, it's not out of phase. It's just turning the pickup round so that it works. Obviously, you know, the way it's running, it works in a different way because it's the opposite way round. And the interesting bit is, you know, like the poles are under the screws, aren't they, on the Les Paul?
Yeah.
So in effect, you know, you've got the poles are then a bit, yeah. Go on.
Can you see?
There we are. Yeah. So yeah, they'd be further apart or nearer if he's doing I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, you change the sort of distance between the two, which will change the sound because obviously the further apart they are, the less, you know. Well, no, actually, it's not quite. They'll still be affected by somebody strumming, but there's all that talk about whether you take one out and there's less effect. But yeah. So I think that's the interesting bit is that it wasn't out of phase at all. You just turned it round. You didn't change the wiring. You just turned it around, put it back in the other way.
How do you rate that second album, Carl, with Peter Green? Do you rate that?
The Hard Road.
Sorry, with John Mayall. Yeah.
What I was going to say was I think that when Peter Green took over from Eric, I imagine he would have sounded a lot like Eric at the live shows. But being in a studio, he would have slowly developed his own sound. He would have sat down. They would have organised a few compositions, do a few covers. John says, here's the mic. You can sing a couple of songs. How about you do a couple of instrumentals, show off your talent, blah, blah, blah. I think Peter really, part of his sound, besides that nasal sound with the pickups, is I like to use this word because I've read about it. He would drench his music in reverb.
And everything was turned up too, on 10, full tilt.
Oh, wow. And he favoured minor scales, obviously the very slow, brooding scales. And part of his sound was minor scales, reverb, and obviously a little bit later on, you had the nasal touch, his beautiful touch with his fingers, and there you have it.
Was his Les Paul out of phase when they recorded that album?
Good question. You can definitely hear it. What's that?
I said I don't know either.
No, I mean you can definitely hear it on a song called off the second album, Mr. Wonderful, called "Love That Burns." Listen to that guitar solo. It is just not only one of my favourite solos, but you can hear that Peter Green's signature nasal sound. Good question.
I think he must have done.
Road. Sorry.
Go on, Carl.
The Hard Road. I love the album. There's I'm not the biggest John Mayall fan as far as when he comes to singing, but I mean, poor little baby.
Yeah. It's not the best.
What a good impersonation.
I was on a British Blues Facebook group about a year ago, and I made a comment saying, does anybody have access to the Blues Breakers with Clapton and Crusader and Hard Road without any vocals, without any, and I got abused.
Gets very serious in those forums, doesn't it? Very quickly. Rather frighteningly.
I got told to go serious. And take.
Yeah, sling your up, mate.
Anyway, yeah, sorry about that. So I look, I kind of agree too, because I listened to that album in the weekend and I couldn't discern with my ear any out of phase tones on that first album he did with John Mayall.
Of course, you'd only notice it if he played with both pickups. I mean, it only happens when you're playing in the middle position with the two pickups. It doesn't happen if you're playing just on the neck pickup or just on the bridge.
Yeah.
Then you aren't going to hear it now. And obviously we've just said that, he obviously went to see Eric, and Eric was playing, on the bridge pickup all night, or on the neck pickup. I can't remember which one around. But anyway, and kind of, so if he's got to do an Eric to start with, then he'll either be playing on one or the other. Sorry, Carl, I was just saying that you wouldn't necessarily hear it unless he was playing on the middle pickup with both pickups. You know, when you've got both pickups engaged, then you hear it. But if he's playing on one or the other, then you're not going to hear then there won't be a out of phase bit, will there? Because you're just playing on a single pickup.
So how important do you think the live tone was back then? Did they put a lot of effort into crafting a sound, or was it just set the amps up and plug in and away you go?
In Fleetwood Mac?
No,
in the Blues
with Mail.
I don't know. I guess there's a certain amount of, although he didn't have the same kit as Eric, there's a certain amount you've got to start off. That's your starting point, isn't it? If you're going to replace Eric Clapton, and you're going to play Eric Clapton songs, you've probably got to start off being close to Eric. But I don't think that. But I think the things I've read is Peter, they were quite experimental. Peter Green wanted to experiment more. He wanted to do different things. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why he left. Constrained by John Mayall being the leader and wanted to do John Mayall's version of the blues.
Yeah, well, there's a famous some outtakes. One song's called Curly, and John Mayall, for I think Peter Green's 23rd or 24th birthday, said, "I'll give you some free studio time." So he went in the studio with John McVie and Ainsley Dunbar, not Mick Fleetwood.
Yeah, Ainsley Dunbar.
Because we forget that John McVie was in the Blues Break, was the bass player since the start, really, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
They went through a variety of drummers, and it was at that point, late '66 or mid '66, probably late '66, that Peter Green was like, "Wow, maybe I am pretty good, or maybe this feels a bit more less restrictive." Because the simple fact he could sing great, play harmonica, slide. He'd obviously, in a short amount of time, thank you, John, for giving me the spotlight, but got my own stuff to do now.
So yeah. For the sake of our video, and also, in 50 years' time when we're all gone and people are looking back and doing some music archaeology, what's the genesis for Fleetwood Mac?
Yeah, how did Mick Fleetwood come into the picture? He did some bit of fill and drum work for the Blues Breakers, didn't he? Or
yeah, he was playing with John Mayall
a little bit later on after Ainsley Dunbar, because Ainsley Dunbar was.
But he was gigging with them.
Yep, obviously a little bit later on.
So
yeah.
So Peter Green called the band Fleetwood Mac, didn't he?
After his rhythm.
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Yeah, do you know why he called them that? I've read this. I like the minutiae of things. That he gave them it because he said, "I'm not going to be in this band for that long, but the bass player, I want to leave the name for the bass player and the drummer, for Mick and John, to carry on." So it's like he had a sort of premonition that he would only be in it. Prophet, yeah. They had this premonition he would only be in it for a certain amount of time, but they could carry it on. So that's why he named them Fleetwood Mac, because so that it was named. Nobody names the band after the drummer and the bass player, except.
Yeah, but he could have been like, a total toe rag, Simon, and said, "I'm going to call it the Peter Green Band," and F you guys when he moved on to something else. That just goes to show how kind and how good he was, that he was willing to name his project after the rhythm section.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Heard of.
Oh, there we are.
There's an interesting patch there as well, because I think John McVie was maybe in a contractual arrangement with John Mayall, so they had Bob Running on bass for a little while.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I thought it was
That's
because he
right.
couldn't decide, but whether to join or not.
Yeah,
But
you're right, because Clapton mentions a bit about that too. That he thought that John McVie wanted to stay with John Mayall because it was a guaranteed weekly income.
yeah. My favourite thing about John McVie is I think this is quite. He was a tax inspector.
Yeah.
No, he was a tax inspector, which I think is really great. But it kind of fits into that kind of not going to art school thing. You know, yet another one who didn't go to art school kind of thing. Not like the other ones.
They had a picture of him.
I
I've
love
got an
that.
old Fleetwood Mac book. It's a really good book. It's actually, I think it was penned by Mick Fleetwood. Just old pictures of the band and some just scribbly
cool.
notes.
Yeah.
Really good book. It's got a penguin on the cover, I think. And
of course,
had John McVie dressed up in a little two-piece suit as a 23-year-old with a briefcase, tax inspector. Yeah. He loved his whiskey too, eh? I think he got kicked out of the band a few times and he came back.
Yeah, they were drinkers, weren't they? Him and Fleetwood were drinkers.
Yeah. But getting back to that little bit of studio time there was a song called Curly, and you could see, like you said before, he was not strictly blues, and he obviously loved his jazz, but he had his ear to the future with that rock prog and heavy rock and some pretty good stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, his 3 years or 4 years of contribution to music is an average musician's 40 years contribution, you know? It's a pretty amazing amount of music in a short amount of time.
But in a sense, Carl, that fits in with, that a lot of people have 5 year, let's say, 3 to 5 years top zenith of their careers kind of thing, If you could take Bob Dylan as a good example, he's had a couple, but the first one is bringing it all back home, Blonde on Blonde, that period, that the mid 60s, 63, 64 to 66, 67, kind of completely doing it. I think you can make a case for quite a lot of bands where their zenith is kind of maybe 5 years, and and then there's a kind of long trail off, but they make their best work, in kind of after, and I think that fits in very nicely with that theory, that kind of 3 years of, 3 or 4 years of Peace Green being in Fleetwood Mac, then, produce some fantastic stuff, produce some amazing, experimental, forward-thinking, forward-looking, records, and then, due to the drugs, sort of stopped really.
Well, I read that if you take maybe 3 or 4 tabs of acid, a doctor will diagnose you as insane. And I think he may have taken a bit more than 3 or 4.
I think he did. I read that his first experience of it was, I didn't realise this at all, was they went to America and he was they played with the Grateful Dead. And the great Ken Owsley introduced him to acid.
Because I read that he had. I'll show you this. This is mints. So he had one of those full of tabs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Possibly the Kool-Aid acid test or the acid Kool-Aid test or whatever it was. I can't remember which one of the words go now. But apparently, they sort of played with the Grateful Dead to kind of obviously jam with them.
And here's a good point that I'm going to bring up that I thought of, but I didn't think of it because we've already talked about it before. But their first album was mainly a covers album. Well.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes, I was going to mention that as well. Directly in line with with lots of other bands that we know, the Rolling Stones or whatever, the Beatles. First album, covers band. Covers material, kind of get on the map. Yeah, but take out stuff that people know and people can.
Breakout song, which was a little, not really an Otis Rush ripoff, but Otis Rush inspired. So his breakout song was Black Magic Woman, because a lot of their songs released as singles, eh?
Yeah.
So
indeed, yes.
So when did Vernon get Spencer into the band? Was it right before they recorded that first album, or did they gig and tour together, do some gigs together beforehand?
No, I think he saw him playing and thought he would be a good foil for Peter, because I don't think Peter Green ever thought of it. I mean, it's interesting, you know. Fleetwood Mac, the first band? Can you think of another band in 19, maybe possibly the Grateful Dead, but who had 3 guitar players? I can't think of another band that had 3 guitar players. I can't think of another band where, you know, 3 guitar players would be sort of tolerated like that, really, you know, or having the imagination to be able to go, you know what, we can accommodate 3 guitar players in this, because obviously everybody's got to be playing something different, you know, or at least 2 of you, you know, it's quite difficult to.
Because Peter, as a trio, could definitely handle himself as being a front man and leading a 3-piece, but he probably wanted a, like you mentioned with foil, he wanted the band to be interesting. It's not about me, you know. Let's have a slide guitar and I'll take a back seat and just play rhythm, 12 bars to the Jeremy's beautiful slide. But Jeremy himself was an enigma in the sense that he was from a remote part of England, 5'2".
5'0" nothing.
County Durham.
What's that?
I said County Durham.
Oh, is that where he's from?
The northeast, yeah. Newcastle.
So remote, pretty remote part?
Yeah, interestingly, although, of course, the Animals came from Newcastle, so there was a bit of a music scene up there. Brian Johnson from AC/DC comes from up there. So there's a bit of a sort of, you know, a nexus of musicians who've come from the northeast, from that way. So he's one of the earlier ones, I think, but not alone, I don't think. And as I say, you know, if the Animals came from there, then, you know, then they would have, you know, there would have been in their wake other people playing, you know, and there would have been a scene there. And I've certainly people went there in the 60s, you know, certainly people played there, you know, on tour and stuff like that, went there in the 60s. But yeah, I think that my understanding is that Peter Green wanted a collaborator. He didn't want Fleetwood Mac to be a pure blues band. He wanted to move away, and he wanted some, you know, and so Danny Cohen was the guy who who enabled that to happen. You know, so he could have a foil, somebody with a different sound, different way of looking at things. You know, and they could collaborate and move away from being purely a blues band.
But I think Peter had a plan from the start, which was going to be. He was like you mentioned the word foil. He was going to have, you know, the band was going to be an interesting band. It was going to be some beautiful solos, a bit of songwriting, some fun party music. Jeremy Spencer was a party guy in the sense that he could rock it up the stage with his 50 songs. You know, he could do Little Richard the same as he could do Elmore James. And we talk about Brian Jones and the slide guitar, but Jeremy Spencer was a heavyweight in the British slide guitar sound.
Yeah, Dust My Broom and all of that. Yeah, Elmore James. See,
he got the sound down pat.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's a different angle on it than the sort of Peter Green thing, isn't it? You know, BB King and whoever the Kings and that.
I mentioned
and
too was part of that nasal sound is Peter Green was a huge BB King fan. Loved him. You can hear him in the licks. But BB King returned the favour, said he was the only white guy that ever gave me the chills, or famous quote.
Yeah.
Made my hair stand up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, I think that didn't Peter Green take that with a pinch of salt. Whatever.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting as a kind of take on it. But he certainly BB King did say that about him.
Yeah,
BB King was a very kind man.
Yeah, so that was the nucleus of the original sound. Was Peter wanted an identity? He wanted a blues band. He wanted a little bit of slide as to give him a break. And then, you know, another discussion maybe we'll talk about next week is the advent of Danny Kerwin.
Yeah, I think that first album is phenomenal. You know, we've spoken about the first Rolling Stones album. being a great example of British blues. Um, but if you want, probably, in my opinion, the second album to give you an example, that first album is pretty good. You know, and it always used to amaze me that people would say negative things about the slide playing of Jeremy Spencer. People would say that he's just a clone or he just ripped off Elmore. But I just loved it. Still do.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
it's great. It's raw. It's I would say I would call it authentic. I would say it's a great portrayal of the blues scene at that particular time from some young guys who weren't murdering the music. They were doing it some justice.
Yeah. Yes, completely. Yeah. So because I guess definitely get that impression that those, that Kerwin and Green, were a foil for each other, played differently, got slightly different things. Kerwin was into sort of 20s jazz as well, as much as anything else. Got a lot of ideas from that kind of thing, and kind of you can see, Peter Green's like, very much a collaborator, leader collaborator, wanting other people to bring other things into it and kind of get other things organised. But I think that's interesting. We go back to all those bands, Led Zeppelin, classic example. First album, pretty much all covers. And I think that's an audience thing myself, It gives you an instant, if you're playing Dust My Broom, and you're going out to the clubs and you're playing Dust My Broom, people know the songs. The challenge is to do them well and to do them in your own style. But, the challenge is you're not introducing your own material and then having to persuade people that your own material, that they've never heard, is going to be good. And I think that it's that's quite tricky to do. And I think obviously that all those bands would have started off, and obviously playing in John Mayall is basically playing is basically a covers band experience. that's unfair. That makes them damning with faint praise, but they're more than that. But the kind of, and what you bring to it is the interesting bit. And I think that's probably quite a sensible business move. Is we'll start off, we'll do a covers band, we'll do Dust My Broom, etc., because people are going to know it, and people, and if we do them well, people will go, spot on, guys.
Well,
and then you can move on, can't you?
Like Dust My Broom, and it's relevant today. You get the foot tapping, you get the girls dancing, you get the fellas drinking, you get the bar manager happy, you get the tickets, the place packed. Because you can't sell out a club just doing slow blues all night.
Yeah, I think we have to be mindful too that the audience that they were playing to was sophisticated. They knew authentic blues, so they had to give them something that that resembled Chicago blues, for example.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And that's as you say, Andrew. That's the tricky bit, isn't it? It's got to be in some way, and it's got to be some way authentic, or have an authentic feel, have an authentic vibe to it that people can see, can't they? And I think that's it's a credit to them that it sounds so good now. You look back on it.
So what year did that first album come out? 67?
67, yeah.
So that album came out when the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper's, and the Stones were recording Satanic Majesties.
Yeah.
Extremely
conservative.
Yeah, well, it's a different strand, isn't it? It's a different strand. That kind of blues strand is. It's interesting. The blues strand continues. From early Stones and through the Blues Breakers into John Mayall. Into Fleetwood Mac, into Cream, and then into Led Zeppelin. There's a clear line of guys playing You know, obviously lower tiers than that. Guys still playing that fairly straight ahead blues stuff. You know, 67. You know, obviously Led Zeppelin started. You know, 68. Similar. You know, Cream still really playing. You know, a heavy version, but really blues.
Fresh Cream has always had a lot of blues, standard blues, obviously, but sped up first album. But you mentioned a good point. Also, just reading up about it before, but Jimmy Page, as we know, as God, but he was telling when he was on tour with the Black Crowes, he was telling all the Black Crowes guys, because Rich Robinson was a big Peter Green fan. He said, "You know what? I just love the man." This is coming from Jimmy Page.
Did you hear last week? Did you hear Andrew and I's last week thing, Carl?
Yeah, watched most of it. Yeah.
Yeah, did that thing about Black Dog? Black Dog being a direct kind of reference to "Oh Well." That same kind of guitar riff, and then singing, and then a guitar riff. Singing. Yeah, which is really interesting. So that kind of tribute.
Called, which started out from the blues. It's called Call and Response.
Call and Response. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It has the same root. But Jimmy Page said, you know, that's Black Dog is a direct reference to "Oh Well."
Wow.
Yeah, he said it. Yeah. It's not. Yeah, I mean they come from the same route, that call and response route for sure. But no, he said it was definitely a reference to "Oh Well," which I think is really cool. But yes, go back to my point about that there was this strand of straight ahead blues stuff, and in a sense the Beatles, because that they were gigging bands. The Beatles, 66, stopped gigging. Became a studio band. So in effect, that's then if you're going to become a studio band, then obviously you can do much more experimentation. You can expand your musical horizons. Paul McCartney very interested in the avant-garde and those sorts of things. It kind of feeds in.
Yep.
But it feeds in a different way if you're in a studio as a studio band than if you're playing live.
I think the Fleetwood Mac were quite clever because right up till Peter Green departed, and when you listen to their live albums, obviously with Then Play On and a few of their singles, you could tell that obviously he was a very talented guy, creative. But the live shows, that half of it was still chopped up with their blues, their slide, stuff, which tells me they never forgot where they came from, and very humble people.
Well, they had three sets there towards the end. They would do the jam session, which is what they got from their experience with hanging out with the Grateful Dead that Simon mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Then Jeremy would come on and with his gold jacket, and he'd do some rock and roll numbers, and get the crowd up and down. And then they would go and do some of their blues songs. So 3 arrows in their bow. But getting back to their lineage, the timeline of their albums, guys. So 67 was the first album. When did Mr. Wonderful come out?
Same year.
Yeah. Usual thing. Knock off 2 in 1 year. In a sense, where you prepare one, then you do one whilst you're touring and running up and down, don't you?
I'll just double check. Okay, so Fleetwood Mac came out 68. Mr. Wonderful came out 68.
Okay, so Jeremy and Peter were on the first album. You'll have to correct me here. When did Danny Kerwin
came on the third album?
The third album, yeah.
Then Play On.
Okay, yeah.
Which Jeremy was omitted from.
That's right. He was making the tea. So what do you think of Mr. Wonderful?
I personally don't mind it. I was just quickly reading up. There was and we'll take what the critics think with a grain of salt, but compared to the first album, it was a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah.
Poor track selection in the sense that they had about 4 songs. yeah, production wasn't quite as good, but I like the album. I've got a soft spot for Love That Burns, but still, still an important document history into the British blues sound.
I think that in many ways it kind of suffers from that, the thing you can get into in terms of second album syndrome, where you do one album, then very quickly you have to do a second one. Well, the first one is, as we said, a covers album, but basically what you've been doing for the last N years. So you can go, okay, that's fine. So you can hone it all up. You can, get all. You go, okay, we can do all of this, and that's all fine. I think you get to the second album, in the same year, you could, a lot of bands have done disappointing second albums, where it hasn't really worked because they've been in a rush, they've been on tour, Led Zeppelin managed to make something out of it by not doing that. But I think there are lots of bands where that is the case, where their second album, which is why there's always this thing about the crucial third album. What's going to happen with the crucial third album? But I think for me, Mr. Wonderful, the interesting part about it is that it had a horn section on it, and it had Christine Perfect, of course, going to be Christine McVie. A piano, got keyboards on it as well, and it's got a horn section. So already Peter Green is going, want a bit more than that, guys. Whether it works completely or not is another matter. But I think the interesting bit about it is that you can already see the expansion in 6 months of sound, ideas, and where he wants to take the band. And I think that's kind of where it is, and what they were trying to do. You get an idea of their ambition from it.
And it's a blessing in disguise, the second album, in the sense that, hey, it sounded more of the same, maybe lacked a bit of life, not as much energy as the first, but Peter being a clever guy, Mike Vernon being clever. Hey, guys, let's regroup. Let's try something again.
Yeah, and don't forget their legacy also, mate, of the fact that they were a touring band and built up a cult status as far as that was concerned. But sort of skipping a little bit forward, I think one of the reasons why Fleetwood Mac are a guitar player's band today, it's because we have so many of their live recordings that capture them in essence. You've got Shrine 69, and you've got Boston Tea Party, and you've got the Blues Jam in Chicago. It just captures a band that's just.
Are they official albums, Andrew? Or are they kind of bootlegs that?
Well, they're available. Yeah,
technical question.
They're available. Well, Blues Jam in Chicago is available.
It was released on Blue Horizon.
Yeah.
Boston Tea Party was released
Boston
on
Tea Party.
It was released on an underground label called Varick, but it was a small label that didn't have much backing and was often overlooked, that particular album. And then the Shrine was made available. I'm not sure what label, but thankful for YouTube.
Yeah, that's right.
So, But I think they went down the same road maybe as the Beatles and the Stones. I think they may have toured America the first time, laid some groundwork, did then play on, came back in 69, and whoa, I think the crowds got bigger and they were, legendary status. So like you say, the first album comes out, hey, what's going on? This sounds pretty good. Second album, bit of a lull. Go to America. Okay, guys, we need a bit of a hit song. Bit of activity. Go back to England, record a studio album. Oh, wow, these guys are, like you say, Grateful Dead. Start an experiment. Go back to America. When America loves you, you are it.
Indeed,
so unfortunately, it was a bit of a double-edged sword as far as Peter Green was concerned, as all of a sudden you got this newfound fame. You've got a whole bunch of friends that he never had before, a whole bunch of money he never had before, a whole bunch of access to certain substances that he never had before.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Fragile minds and and decent drugs. Not a good
I can
combination.
imagine if Peter never made it big, I can imagine him playing in a club with his mind in East London at a blues bar, probably being perfectly more than happy.
Yeah. Well, Peter Green never really liked the fame thing, did he?
No.
No.
And getting back to him being a butcher, I can't imagine him hacking up meat. He would have been probably doing the finer cuts, like the filet mignon and Venice schnitzel.
No, he'd just be getting the meat, mate, and measuring it out and weighing it and wrapping it up and smiling to the ladies over the counter.
Oh, okay. He was at the butcher's hand.
Yeah.
Kosher too, probably. No pork.
Yeah.
But no, bring up a good point. It's an amazing timeline. I mean, in that short amount of time, you know, a basic blues band, all of a sudden a couple of hit songs, and then a radical change in direction with Danny Kerwin and Then Play On.
Yeah, well, I think then Play On is an interesting album, and we should talk about that in the context of its own show, because you know that's the introduction of Danny Kerwin, and we need to talk. And Danny's a subject by himself. So, but that Then Play On certainly, paved the way for a lot of other albums and a lot of other bands, right through the 70s, didn't it?
Yeah, we won't talk about it too much tonight, but we'll talk about it next week, because that set up the twin guitar sound, twin lead.
Twin leads, yeah.
Allman Brothers and a whole bunch of those bands. Santana with that guy that went to play with Journey. What's the guy with the nose?
Neil Schon.
Neil Schon,
yeah. 17-year-old Neil Schon or whatever he was.
and we talk about Fleetwood Mac, the original Fleetwood Mac, being overlooked. How many times have we heard someone say, Black Magic, Santana? Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you should say that, because I got a message from Bruce earlier, and Bruce was sharing his experience, because he's a Fleetwood Mac nut too, and he was saying that, you know, people in the States, when they think of Fleetwood Mac, when you point out, that Black Magic Woman was Fleetwood Mac, they look at him and go, really?
Really? That's it.
I'll be honest. I'll be honest with you guys. So we didn't talk about how we got into Fleetwood Mac. So we should probably end the show by talking about how we got into it. So I knew Fleetwood Mac, Carl and Simon and guys in the chat, through the disco version of the band. You know, I remember going to my nan's place, and my aunt was going to Auckland to see Fleetwood Mac. Now that would have been 1978, and it was on the end of the Rumours tour. So, and you know, there were some radio songs. So that was my exposure to Fleetwood Mac, and it wasn't until, again, the pivotal year for me, 1981, where I was at my uncle's place, and they had that that first album with the rubbish can, Fleetwood Mac. So I remember, thinking, okay, this is, and I remember putting that on and dropping the needle and going, wow, this isn't Fleetwood Mac. So I remember scratching my head, going, "What's going on here?" And then lifting the needle up and then going through the songs, trying to hear a woman sing. There was nothing. And I remember, you know, talking to my nana, and she looked at me. I don't know what you're talking about. See you later. Piss off. Off we go. And I remember talking to my uncle. It would have been weeks later, and he said, "That's the original Fleetwood Mac." And then he told me, "Have you heard of the song Albatross?" You know, dang, and I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, that's Fleetwood Mac." So that's my introduction into Fleetwood Mac when I was about 15 years old. Simon, what's your experience?
Well, slightly different. I can remember seeing them doing Albatross on Top of the Pops.
Wow.
So, well, because I'm old, so I can remember, so I can remember that kind of 68, 69. We used to talk Top of the Pops, and they would be on doing this. Interesting. And this is something else. Doing the singles, doing Oh Well, doing Green Manalishi, doing
Man of the World,
Albatross, Man of the World, doing all those things, and I kind of so. I knew Fleetwood Mac from and Black Magic Woman. I knew them from that, but not much else really. Never really delved into their blues thing until, a bit like you, but a different direction, Andrew. In the early 80s, I worked 79 to 82. I worked in a record shop in Bristol, a second-hand record shop, and it was great. Tony's Records, and I met through working in that shop a guy who's since become a really good friend of mine. He's called Gerard, and he has a Bristol group called the Blue Aeroplanes. But he's a audiophile, massive. He's got thousands of records, and he introduced me to the first two Fleetwood Mac albums, saying you should check these out. They're really good. They're really cool. They're good British blues things. So he introduced me to the first Fleetwood Mac album and the second one, and saying look, they're really good players and stuff. So he kind of introduced me to that. So he introduced me to many things, which I have to be thankful for. But that's one of them. So I have kind of two kind of parallel.
So what was your experience when you heard that album? Did you go, oh, this is okay, this is good, or was it like, wow?
Well, it was wow. It was wow. This is really good. I mean, because I hadn't really heard them before. And I. Obviously I'm old enough to have a kind of conscious of the timeline of things, and no, but you could see, you could hear, you hear them now. You can hear that they're brilliant records, really well played, well organised, and got something really good about them, especially that kind of twin guitar thing, which is in those days not many other bands had twin guitars. The Stones had twin guitars, but but not in that kind of blues, that straightforward blues thing. So yeah, I remember thinking they were good. Getting them. They are. That's the acid test, isn't it? I got them.
I don't mind telling you guys this, and Carl might remember it, but for 20 years, when I was talking about Fleetwood Mac with people, no one in 20 years, or maybe I'm showing my age, or even 30 years, no one ever made the connection between Fleetwood Mac and Peter Green until I met Carl.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Because when we got together, and it's like, hey man, how's it going? Yeah, good. What music do you listen to? Oh yeah. And so we were just rattling off these bands, and I remember Carl said, yeah, Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green. I went, wow, someone in the flesh and blood's actually, yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. People don't. When I say he's a shadowy figure, he's not shadowy like shady, but shadowy like he appeared and then he left really quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about
3
you,
years?
Carl?
So my dad married my mum.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad you're not a bastard. Was that
good start?
So my mum had two brothers. One guy in particular who had the blues jam at chess, and my dad was a bit like a sponge. He wanted to fit in, and he liked some of the music. He was a bit of an old hippie. Neil Young was his favourite, but he got into the blues via his brother-in-laws, my mum's brothers. So we had blues jam and chess on a cassette in the car, and I heard Watch Out and Ooh Baby, a Howling Wolf song. And keep in mind, a lot of that blues jam at chess was just a three-piece.
Mm.
So Peter doing the guitar, rhythm, lead, and singing, and just a bass and drum. And I'm thinking, wow, this sounds really good. And I was just a young kid. And I think what cemented me as far as Fleetwood Mac is like you is listening to Albatross is like these guys are special. This is like this music's so dreamy, so unique, so masterful, so eerie, so I don't know, so many words. Who are these people? I love them. I want to know more about them.
Did that song go on to become a number one?
I think so. I'll have a look.
I can't remember. Yeah. But it was a big hit, and it wasn't. I mean, it's interesting. It was a big hit. Wasn't instrumental. Was kind of slow, dreamy, as you say, and kind of stood out, didn't it? I mean, I can remember it really standing out in even that sort of
became
that late
Fleetwood Mac's
'60s
only number one hit.
They are. I see. Yeah. But kind of. But you're right. That standout quality of it is really interesting. And even then, it didn't sound like anyone else. I can't think of another song that was like it.
And unusual chord progression, E major, and he does these funny things. But wasn't part of the solo played on Danny Kirwan's Ring? Was this a slide, or was it just beautiful? Yeah,
could have been. Yeah. Probably just doing stuff. Yeah.
And you got to
played on a Strat.
Oh, is that right? Yep. And you got to remember to play that loud and clean with all that space in between the notes. You're going to hear if you're going to do a mistake, you're going to hear it loud and clear.
Clang.
So that
I wonder how many takes they did.
Well, shows you how good they are, because they could do that live. They could do that live. Have you heard their live versions?
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah. So amazing, kind of.
That's on the pedigree of classical or jazz. That musical prowess they had.
Yeah,
I mean,
completely.
Rolling Stones couldn't do that; it'd be just too ragged.
Keith's going to play the same thing twice, really.
That's a good. But you bring up a good point. Yeah, absolutely. There's no way that the Rolling Stones could have played that. There's absolutely no way.
Not even Jimmy Page.
Good point.
No,
Jimmy Page,
it's kind of controlled, isn't it? Kind of controlled and structured, organised, and you have to play the parts.
I'm going to stick my head out and my neck and just say that was a musical high point, not only in the world, but especially for England. A rock band, early 20s, that's a song they've used for commercials, on radios, on just soundtracks. It's a monster of a song.
Yeah, but you bring out that interesting point, which is about the fact that to go and play it, you can't. There's no wandering off, is there? There's no kind of improvisational thing in it. There's no kind of we can just jam this out kind of thing. It's like here, and whatever I play is not the same thing. It's like no, you've got to play it like it is. Because otherwise, it's not going to work.
And the key to that song is not only the beautiful, laid back feel, but is it the middle of the outro where they do that twin guitar lead?
Yeah.
They're in synchronicity. It's unbelievable.
You can't stop messing about, can you? I'll just do a bit of jamming. No.
So how was that song crafted? Was it a jam in the studio, or did Peter have that whole song worked out? And he went and played it and said, "This is what we're going to do." Do you guys know?
It was apparently inspired by a band I love, which you want to talk about a type band, Santo and Johnny, Sleepwalk.
That's right. Yeah,
which had the pedal steel. He was a pedal steel guy. So you want to recreate that. And you mentioned before about Peter Green's first bands being like Hank Marvin kind of surf guitar. So it was almost like homage to his first bands almost. The Dick Dale, the Wipeout, the Hank Marvin, the Shadows. So maybe
that's right. Yeah. It's the Hank Marvin thing, isn't it? The slow kind of. I think it's a tribute. Some of it's a tribute to Hank Marvin. All that slow, very clean. And one of my favourite playing, bands, very organised, is Hank Marvin, isn't it? Yeah.
And he would have been listening to another surf band called The Ventures, which are an amazing band.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which did
60s surf band, weren't they?
Yeah. What's their famous song? Walk, Don't Run.
That's it. Yeah.
I've just had an epiphany. So Albatross is inspired by surf bands. Is that what you're
Surf
saying?
bands.
In a
Well,
roundabout way, yeah.
in a roundabout way, yeah. And the Shadows,
Wow.
that very clean, kind of very organised, playing is very Hank Marvin, isn't it? As Carl, as you said, and when you say it, you go, "Oh yeah, so it is." You can hear it, can't you? Kind of like that
It
lineage.
says here, Green had been working on the piece for some time before the addition to the band of 18-year-old guitarist Danny Kerwin.
18-year-old, yeah. Amazing.
18-year-old guitar player. Slide guitarist Jeremy Spencer was not generally inclined to work with Green, who had felt unable to realise the overall effect that he wanted. With Kerwin's input, not John, but Kerwin, Green completed the piece and it was recorded just 2 months after Kerwin joined, without Spencer present.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
So in a way,
1970. Yeah.
It was obviously a masterpiece, and Peter Green couldn't have done it without Danny. Danny added that beautiful, almost angelic touch, because it's very much a song from the heavens, isn't it?
Yeah. But as you said, it's kind of you can hear a tribute to other things in there.
Yeah.
The thing that occurs to me about it is, was Albatross? It wasn't on any of their. Was it on any of their albums?
No.
Greatest hits.
Greatest hits only. Yep.
Is that the case for Oh Well, Green Man?
Yes.
So they made
today.
So did they have this kind of? Sorry, I was just sort of working this out myself. So they had a singles career and an albums career.
Yep.
And the two things are not joined together.
And it wasn't
maybe joined together by their touring.
But the touring, but they didn't. I was just having a quick look. None of those singles are on their first 3 albums, are they?
No.
What happened was the Americans thought, "What the hell are you guys doing?"
Yeah.
So they repackaged, then Play On and added Oh Well on the.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, added them in. But the original albums, they're not on, are they? Yes, that's interesting. Yes, that
it shows you how you've got to respect them for how authentic they are, because they didn't have a hit song attached to any of their albums.
That's why that first greatest hit album is an important album to have.
Oh, and don't get me started about a song.
What, The Pious Bird of Good Omen?
As well, yeah, that's a good one.
Which is, of course, a reference to Albatross.
And it had
Albatross is the pious bird of good omen in was it Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner?
It had that interesting lady.
I like the trivia.
and I like to talk about how we talk about Jimmy Page and going back to their Celtic medieval image.
Yeah,
you can hear Peter Green's Jewish lineage in Oh Well Part 2.
Yeah.
With
That's
the
right.
acoustic,
It's got 2 distinct parts for the acoustic guitar stuff. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
The acoustic, and you can hear the caravan going across the desert and maybe trading dates and olives and talking to a couple of wise men and maybe some myrrh and incense. And
yes, of course. Yeah,
maybe some goats, eating some goats, sharing a kebab, a big tent.
Eating some goats. Or all of them. Goat slaughter. We ate them all. I like that a lot. We ate some goats. In fact, we ate them all.
Hey guys,
sorry,
it's been a great show. I'm just mindful of the time because I've got a couple of things that I have to do, if that's okay, guys. So
I have as well. Yes, I've got to get my children off to school.
As usual, an hour and a half goes bloody quick when I'm hanging out with you guys. I wish my work would go as fast as this, but it never does. Maybe you guys should come to work with me.
That might be dangerous in my case.
I'm just going to do a shout out and then pass it on to you guys. So Bruce, it's a pleasure having you join us. for a show, because he makes positive comments and he supports us really well. So in other chats and other shows, he always makes a reference to our show, guys, and what we're doing. He's interested in what we're doing, so we appreciate that. And he's Fleetwood Mac nut too, so that's always good.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, Gussie, been interesting. I've been having a separate chat with Gussie in the chat, guys, while you guys were talking, and also with Wednesday Store. Wednesday Store's got this guitar here, and he's transformed this guitar into a Keith Richards tribute. So I'll be keen to see what he's done about that. So yeah, thanks, guys. Gussie, Bruce, Jimmy T from Aussie. Always a pleasure hanging out with Jimmy. Jimmy always is a good supporter of what we do. Appreciate it too, Jimmy. I meet him in other chats. So next week we're going to talk about, if you guys aren't aware of this, and if you guys want to do some research, unfortunately the album's not on Spotify or YouTube, but there are parts of it on iTunes, but there are parts of it on YouTube. It's Then Play On. Check it out if you want to check that album out in preparation for next week's show, because that's what we're going to be talking about.
Fleetwood Mac,
yeah, and I think if it's right, we can also talk about the singles as well, because I think that those, as we've just said, that kind of parallel, complete kind of singles career, I think bears some looking at in more detail. Those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like Andrew and like yourself, a big Fleetwood Mac fan, especially the early years. Obviously, I mean, I won't write off the late 70s, the 80s acts. I mean, we shouldn't even really talk about that because it's not worth mentioning, but they are who they are. But Peter Green, you mentioned the word prophetic.
That's telling me to wake up.
But Peter Green, I mean, there's a lot of guitar players I like, but he's one of my favourites of all time. So I'm glad we're talking about him, because he needs to be talked about more.
Yeah, it's one of the few bands that have completely different eras, don't they? That are almost not connected. What they did with Peter Green is not what they did with Rumours or Fleetwood Mac.
Two different bands.
Two different bands, yeah, completely, absolutely. yeah, doing completely different things. Yeah, can be viewed almost as two different separate genres of music. Everything, yeah. Yes.
So I'm looking forward to next week's show.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Do you guys want to say goodbye?
Yes. Thanks, Gussie, Bruce, Jimmy T. Who else have we got? Mark Dillon. Yeah. Hey, Mark. How you doing? Wednesday Store. Thanks for coming in and supporting us, guys. It's really good to see you. See you next week.
Carl.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for the support, and I appreciate the simple fact that once again Andrew's organised this, and Simon from halfway around the world. You probably got some Irish blood. Don't get too cocky about beating the All Blacks. Not going to happen again.
Actually, with a surname of Williams, much more Welsh than.
But I appreciate your contribution to the mix. So thank you.
Yeah, we could beat the All Blacks in the meaningless autumn internationals. Less so in the World Cups, I've noticed.
Yeah.